Imagine if you had one of the most horrifying and disturbing dreams of your entire life, and it actually ended up coming true. Well, today's stories are about just that, the strange and incredible power of premonition. But before we get into it,
hello and welcome to Back-to-Back Horror Stories, where we tell you a few different strange and or creepy stories back to back. Make sure to watch to the end so that your dreams will avoid coming true. And if you end up enjoying this video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, let's get started. In 1979, a man named David Booth repeatedly began having nightmares involving an extremely deadly plane crash. He had these dreams over 10 nights in a row, and they were so vivid that he contacted representatives from the Federal Aviation Administration, constantly trying to warn them of his visions. One of these was a man by the name of Jack Barker, and what David explained to him was that in each and every nightmare he had, he first sees an American Airlines flight taking off on the runway, and as it takes off, he suddenly gets the feeling that something's wrong with the engine. Then while in midair, it turns 180 degrees, hits the ground, and explodes in a fiery inferno. Now, despite the fact that the people that he talked to that worked at the FAA, including Jack, wrote everything down and collected all its information, they were unable to take any action, largely because although his dream was highly detailed, he just wasn't able to provide them with a specific flight number, which, believe it or not, might actually make a bit of sense considering there's over 6,700 American Airlines flights on a daily basis. And also, as far as being hesitant to do anything, it's like, well, what could they even do? Stop every flight based off of a person's dream? But despite this, not taking any action at all would turn out to be something that they regretted later on. And that's because shortly after takeoff on May 25th, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191 crashed, leading to the deaths of over 273 people, the details of which match the descriptions David gave to a T. And when he finally received a phone call from Jack telling him the news of the plane crash, he became extremely emotional. But unfortunately, sometimes dreams do come true.
On September 30th of 1861, a man named Morgan Andrew Robertson was born in Oswego, New York. Morgan was the son of Andrew Robertson, who was a ship captain on the Great Lakes, which is a series of large interconnected freshwater lakes with sea-like characteristics in the mid-east region of North America that connects to the Atlantic Ocean via the St. Lawrence River. At the age of 15, Morgan went to work as a cabin boy and would eventually rise to become a first mate. A first mate or chief officer is usually in charge of the ship's cargo and deck crew. They have a ton of responsibility with other things as well. Morgan worked as a sailor from age 15 till about 25 when he decided that that life just wasn't for him. Soon he would find himself training to become a jeweler and a diamond setter. A diamond setter is someone who cuts and examines diamonds to make sure they look visually appealing and to make sure they're securely placed on. He went to study jewelry making at Cooper Union, which is in New York City and is a private college for science and art. Morgan would do this for about 10 years until his vision started to become impaired, and then he struggled to think about a new career. In 1896, a friend of Morgan suggested to him that he read a recently published sea adventure story by English journalist Rudyard Kipling. One of Kipling's most famous stories include The Jungle Book, if you're familiar with that. Morgan then spent 5 of his last 25 cents that he had to buy the magazine that the story was featured in. On his train ride home through New York City, he read the story. He was compelled and very inspired by what he just read. It had unleashed a creative beast inside of him that he had never known before. Morgan immediately wanted to just write stories, so that's all he would do. It took him 2 days to write his first story about a mechanic whose independent ways of thinking made him ill-suited for conventional life. This story's name is Survival. Morgan would continue to write at least 144 stories that we know about. One of these 144 stories was released in 1898 and originally titled Futility. In this novella, now titled The Wreck of the Titan or Futility, Morgan describes a transatlantic voyage of a huge British luxury passenger liner, the largest the world has ever seen. On the ship was 3,000 very wealthy passengers who all paid a lot of money to be there. The ship was named the Titan and was a steamship that was considered to be pretty much unsinkable. In the book, the ship's owners were looking to break a speed record for crossing the Atlantic, so the stakes for money were very high. The owners ordered the captains to travel at full speed no matter what the conditions are. Soon, the Titan would then collide with an iceberg, causing fatal damage to the integrity of the hull. The ship had 24 lifeboats lifeboats, which was nowhere near enough to accommodate the 3,000 passengers, and everyone but 13 people perished in the tragedy. Does this sound familiar? On April 15th of 1912, the Titanic, a British luxury passenger liner, sank on a transatlantic voyage by hitting an iceberg. There's a ton of similarities and differences between the Titanic and the Titan. We're going to use the 1898 version of the book and the actual facts of the Titanic. The nationality of both ships was British. The length of the Titan was 800 feet. The length of the Titanic was 882.5 feet. They were both made out of steel. The weight of the Titan was 45,000. The weight of the Titanic was 66,000. The Titan had a horsepower of 40,000. The Titanic had a horsepower of 46,000. They both had 3 propellers, and they both had 2 masts. The Titan had 19 watertight compartments. The Titanic had 16. The Titan had 24 lifeboats. The Titanic had 20. They both had a passenger capacity of 3,000. The Titan had 3,000 passengers on board. The Titanic had 2,228. The Titan's speed of impact was 25 knots. The Titanic's was 22.5. The time of impact for the Titan was near midnight, and for the Titanic, it was 11:40 p.m. The point of impact on both ships was the starboard. In both ships, this happened in the month of April. The number of survivors on the Titan was 13, and on the Titanic, it was 705. Morgan's book was originally titled Futility, and shortly after the tragedy of the Titanic, a publishing company reissued it as The Wreck of the Titan or Futility. I'm guessing this was an attempt to sell more copies. There were also a ton of other differences in the story as well. For example, in Futility, the ship collided with another ship, and there was also even a fight with a polar bear. But the amount of similarities, in my opinion, outweighs the differences. It's so coincidental that it's almost down to the exact name. Morgan denied having any psychic abilities and said most of his details were the product of his own understanding of the shipping industry. He also supposedly tried to patent the periscope because he wrote about it in 1905 in his book The Submarine Destroyer. As soon as the Titanic sank, this instantly propelled Morgan into a life of fame. He started receiving letters saying that he was responsible for the sinking of the Titanic and that this was all his fault. Another prophetic book that Morgan wrote was titled Beyond the Spectrum and was about a future war between the United States and the Empire of Japan. In the book, Japan didn't declare war, but instead they decided to launch a sneak attack on United States ships that were en route to the Philippines and Hawaii. Does this sound familiar? Pearl Harbor. But 3 years after the Titanic sunk, in the afternoon of March 24th of 1915, at 53 years old, Morgan Andrew Robertson was found deceased in his room at the Alamoc Hotel in Atlantic City, New Jersey. His cause of death is unknown, but it's believed he died of a potential overdose. What are your thoughts about Morgan Robertson? Did he predict the Titanic sinking?
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today.
If you enjoyed this video and want to see more of our content, our TikTok and our Instagram account is in the bio.
Also, if you have any idea for content you'd like us to make in the future, please let us know in the comments below, and it could end up being in a future video. Thank you for watching.